They landed in China as refugees, their family's fortune shattered. Within a single generation, they would command a commercial empire, build one of the world's most iconic cityscapes from the ground up, and play a crucial role in rescuing nearly 20,000 of their fellow Jews from the Nazis. This is the incredible story of the Sassoons and the Kaduris, two rival Jewish dynasties who left a permanent mark on modern China. It's a tale of staggering ambition and wealth, set against a backdrop of war, revolution, and the dawn of the modern age. It's a story you can still see today in the soaring skylines of Shanghai and Hong Kong. But it's also a story with a dark side, founded on a controversial trade that created immense fortunes while fueling conflict. To understand their rise, we have to go back to a moment of persecution and a desperate escape in the dark of night. Chapter 1: The Exodus from Baghdad. Our story doesn't start in the gleaming towers of China, but in the ancient, bustling city of Baghdad. For centuries, Baghdad was home to a prosperous and influential Jewish community, and at the very top were the Sassoons, who served for generations as the chief treasurers to the pashas, the Ottoman governors of the city. They weren't just influential, they were known as the Rothschilds of the East. The family patriarch was David Sassoon, born in 1792. He was brilliant, astute, and groomed to take over. But the world he knew was crumbling. The Ottoman Empire was in decline, and local rulers could be brutal. In the 1820s, a notoriously cruel and anti-Semitic governor named Dawood Pasha took control of Baghdad. Dawood Pasha saw the Jewish community's wealth as his personal treasure chest. He launched a campaign of terror, levying insane taxes, seizing property, and imprisoning community leaders for ransom. In 1829, he came for David Sassoon. The 37-year-old heir was kidnapped and thrown in prison, with the Pasha demanding a colossal sum for his release. The family paid, and David was freed. But the message was crystal clear. Their time in Baghdad was over. Staying meant ruin and death. A plan was hatched. One night in 1828, aided by some well-placed bribes, David Sassoon and his family slipped through the city gates under the cover of darkness. They made their way downriver, eventually landing in Persia, waiting for their next move. They were refugees, stripped of their home and much of their fortune. David Sassoon was a man without a country, but he had an unbreakable will and a genius for finance. He saw that a new world was being built on global trade powered by the British Empire, so he decided to tie his future to it. In 1832, he and his family arrived in Bombay, India. The refugee from Baghdad was about to lay the first stone of a new empire. Chapter 2: The Bombay Foundation. When David Sassoon arrived in Bombay, he had his reputation, his family, and not much else. He set up a small counting house, David Sassoon and Company, in 1832. His business policy was simple but powerful. He staffed his company with people from his community back in Baghdad. This created a tight-knit network built on a shared language, culture, and absolute trust. At first, he dealt in everything from spices and textiles to precious metals. But David's true genius was his understanding of family as the ultimate business tool. He had 14 children, and he saw his 8 sons as lieutenants for a global enterprise. In a move straight out of the Rothschilds' playbook, he sent his sons to manage new branches in key trading hubs across Asia, Calcutta, Burma, Malaya, and beyond. This family network wasn't just efficient, it was a private intelligence service that gave him a huge edge over his rivals. One son, Elias, was especially ambitious. He would eventually break away to form his own company, E.D. Sassoon and Company, sparking a fierce family rivalry. For decades, the old and new Sassoon companies would compete, pushing both to become even more powerful. The family's first great fortune came from textiles. When the American Civil War choked off cotton supplies to England's mills, the Sassoons stepped in, shipping Indian cotton at hugely inflated prices. They became fabulously wealthy, soon ranking as the richest family in India. But it was another, far more controversial commodity that would launch them into the stratosphere of global power. That commodity was opium.
Chapter 3: The Opium Empire in China. The key that unlocked unimaginable wealth for the Sassoons was the opening of China. After losing the First Opium War, China was forced by the British to sign the 1842 Treaty of Nanking. This treaty handed Hong Kong to Britain and, more importantly, opened 5 treaty ports, including Shanghai, to foreign trade. And for many foreign merchants, trade really meant one thing: opium. David Sassoon saw his chance. In 1844, he opened an office in Hong Kong, and a year later, another in Shanghai, right on the city's famous waterfront, the Bund. While the opium trade was technically still illegal in China, the British military made sure that Chinese authorities couldn't stop the flood. The Sassoons dove in headfirst. They didn't just participate in the trade, they revolutionized it. Instead of using middlemen, they bought opium crops directly from producers in India, controlling the entire supply chain. They even ran their own fleet of fast opium clippers to get the drug from Bombay to China as quickly as possible, undercutting rivals like Jardine Matheson. By the 1870s, the Sassoons had come to dominate the business, handling a staggering portion of the opium trade out of India. The profits were astronomical. Opium was the single most valuable commodity traded in the 19th century, and the Sassoons were its undisputed kings. Of course, this trade had a devastating human cost. It fueled an addiction crisis that ravaged China, drained the nation's silver, and caused immense social chaos. The family's legacy would forever be tied to this dark history. They brought opium to China, and in return, they took out tea, silk, and mountains of silver. This immense wealth, born from the opium trade, became the foundation for everything that came next. Chapter 4: Building Shanghai, the Sassoon Era. As the 20th century began, the heart of the Sassoon Empire moved to Shanghai, and its destiny fell into the hands of one man, Sir Victor Sassoon. The great-grandson of David, Victor was a flamboyant, life-than-large character. Educated at Cambridge, he'd served in the Royal Air Force in World War I. A plane crash left him with a permanent limp, but did nothing to slow him down. In the 1920s, Victor made a bold move. He transferred the bulk of his family's massive fortune from India to Shanghai. He saw the city as the future, a chaotic, glamorous, and divided metropolis known as the Paris of the Orient. Victor didn't just want to do business in Shanghai, he wanted to build it. He pivoted away from the controversial opium trade, which Britain finally outlawed in 1906, and went all in on real estate. His canvas was the Bund, the city's grand waterfront promenade. In 1926, he started his masterpiece, the Sassoon House. It was a stunning Art Deco skyscraper, the first of its kind in the Eastern Hemisphere. Inside, he opened the Cathay Hotel, a palace of such luxury it was immediately nicknamed the #1 mansion in the Far East. Charlie Chaplin and Marlene Dietrich were guests. Victor himself lived in the lavish penthouse, throwing legendary parties and looking over his growing kingdom. But he didn't stop there. He built a string of landmarks that still define Shanghai, like the Hamilton Building and the Metropole Hotel. All told, his companies built or managed hundreds of properties, transforming Shanghai's skyline. Beneath the playboy exterior, however, was a razor-sharp businessman. His real estate empire was a cash machine. Yet the Sassoons were more than just builders. They also built a community, funding schools and hospitals for the growing Jewish population. In 1920, Victor's uncle founded the magnificent Ohel Rachel Synagogue in memory of his wife. It was the largest in the Far East and still stands today as a historic landmark. Chapter 5: The Kaduri Counterpoint and Hong Kong. While the Sassoons were dominating Shanghai, another Baghdadi Jewish family was quietly building its own rival empire, one that would ultimately outlast them. This was the Kaduri family. The two families were connected by blood and business.
The Kaduri story starts with a young man named Eli Kaduri. Born in Baghdad, Eli's family had fallen on hard times, so in 1880, at just 15, he left home and found work as a clerk for the Sassoons. Eli learned the trade under the Sassoon umbrella, but was itching to strike out on his own. He borrowed 500 Hong Kong dollars and started his own stock brokerage. His philosophy was different. Where Victor Sassoon was a high-stakes gambler betting on Shanghai real estate, Eli Kaduri was a cautious, long-term investor. He largely steered clear of the opium trade and instead put his money into the building blocks of a modern city: utilities, real estate, and infrastructure. While he had major interests in Shanghai, including the city's other grand hotel, the Majestic, his focus shifted to the British colony of Hong Kong. It was a brilliant move. In 1901, he co-founded China Light and Power, now CLP Group, the company that today provides electricity to over 80% of Hong Kong's population. He also took control of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Hotels Group, whose crown jewel was, and still is, the Peninsula Hong Kong. Opened in 1928, it was a symbol of elegance that directly rivaled the Sassoons' Cathay Hotel. Like the Sassoons, the Kaduris were also major philanthropists, believing wealth was a sacred trust. They founded schools and hospitals, focusing on helping the local Chinese population. The rivalry between the two families was real, a battle fought in boardrooms and with dueling luxury hotels. But soon, a threat far greater than any business competition would force them to unite. By the way, if you're finding this slice of hidden history as fascinating as I do, hit that like button and subscribe. It really helps us bring more of these stories to light. And you won't want to miss what's coming next. Back to our story, as the world teetered on the brink of war. Chapter 6. A haven from the Holocaust. By the late 1930s, Europe was descending into darkness. As Nazism spread, Jewish people desperately sought an escape, but country after country slammed its doors shut. In this grim moment, one city became an unlikely beacon of hope: Shanghai. As an international settlement, it was an open city, no visa required. For thousands of Jews in Germany and Austria, a ticket to Shanghai was their only chance at survival. They arrived by the thousands, somewhere between 18,000 and 20,000, penniless and disoriented. There were doctors, musicians, and merchants from Vienna and Berlin, now refugees crowded into the poor Hangzhou district, struggling to survive. Their arrival created a massive humanitarian crisis. The leaders of Shanghai's established Jewish community, Victor Sassoon and the Kaduris, knew they had to act. Despite their rivalry, they joined forces. Eli Kaduri reportedly told Victor Sassoon, "Victor, you have to stop being the playboy. You have to take the lead here. I will follow you." And Victor did. He converted several of his grand buildings into dormitories for the refugees and set up a fund to help them start small businesses. The Kaduri family, especially Horace Kaduri, focused on education, creating a school for the refugee children to give them some sense of a normal life. Together with other community leaders, they established a network of committees providing food, shelter, and medical care. It was a colossal effort, funded by their immense fortunes. Victor Sassoon even used his influence with the occupying Japanese, bluffing that he might invest in their factories to persuade them to allow the refugees to remain. This wasn't just charity. It was one of the great rescue efforts of the Holocaust era. Their wealth, built on a complex history, was now saving thousands of lives.
Chapter 7. The end of an era. But the Shanghai haven couldn't last. In December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. The war in the Pacific had begun. The Japanese army seized the entire city, and the privileged world of the Sassoons and Kaduris burst. Under pressure from their Nazi allies, the Japanese forced Shanghai's 23,000 Jewish refugees into a restricted sector for stateless refugees, what became known as the Shanghai Ghetto. The war was a disaster for both families. The Japanese arrested Eli Kaduri and his son Lawrence in Hong Kong and his other son Horace in Shanghai. Eli's palatial home was confiscated, and he became a prisoner in his own house. Old and in poor health, Eli died in 1944, before the war ended. When the war was over, a new storm was already gathering: the Chinese Civil War. Here, Victor Sassoon made a fatal mistake. He bet on the ruling nationalists and kept his fortune tied up in Shanghai. The Kaduris, led by Lawrence, were more cautious. They quietly began moving their assets to the relative safety of British-ruled Hong Kong. In 1949, Mao Zedong's Communist Army marched into Shanghai. The new government denounced families like the Sassoons and Kaduris as exploiters. For Victor, it was all over. His vast empire of hotels and apartments, his entire Shanghai kingdom, was confiscated by the state. He lost a fortune worth what would likely be billions today and fled China for good. The Sassoon dynasty in China was finished. The Kaduris, having made the shrewder move, fled to Hong Kong and doubled down. While the Sassoon name faded from the world of global business, the Kaduris would go on to build an even greater, more enduring empire. Chapter 8. The Lingering Legacy. The story of the Sassoons and the Kaduris is one of stark contrasts. They were refugees who became empire builders. They were philanthropists whose fortunes were built on the opium trade. They were saviors who helped rescue thousands from the Holocaust. Today, the Sassoon legacy is mostly history, written in stone and steel. When you stand on the Bund in Shanghai, you are standing in the city that Victor Sassoon built. The iconic building with the green pyramid roof, that's his Cathay Hotel, now the Fairmont Peace Hotel, a silent testament to a forgotten king of Shanghai. The Kaduri legacy, however, is very much alive. From their base in Hong Kong, the family, now led by Sir Michael Kaduri, still controls CLP Group, which powers the city and the world-renowned Peninsula Hotels. They cannily rebuilt ties with mainland China, and unlike the Sassoons, their influence endures. Their intertwined story leaves us with a question. How do you measure a legacy? Is it in the money they made, the buildings they left behind, or the lives they saved? The story of these two families is a complex tapestry of ambition, morality, and survival. A story that shows how fortunes can be made, lost, and remade, but the mark you leave on the world can last forever.